Well, hello again. It's me, Spencer Hess, continuing our discussion of Native and Caitlin B. Curtis. Today's episode has a minimal amount to do with the book or her, and much more to do about the group that she's a part of, the PMC, who they are, what they're about, where they come from, what drives them, and what puts them ill at ease. So the PMC, right? The so-called professional managerial class. Not to be confused with private military contractors. We're going to be doing a quick and cursory look at how different theorists have looked at the PMC, as well as their different perspectives on what they're really about. First up, we had Barbara Ehrenreich, who published in 1989, The Fear of Falling, The Inner Life of the Middle Class. In her account, she uses the terms professional middle class and professional managerial class interchangeably. And she lists four primary indicators that someone belongs to this grouping of people. The first of them is occupation, she writes. Unlike those fortunate enough to find themselves in the upper class, members of the PMC must work for a living. A minority, including many physicians, lawyers, therapists, etc., are self-employed, but the trend over the years has been for professionals to be absorbed into the workforce of large bureaucratic organizations, like corporations, hospitals, or law firms. Most are salaried employees, sometimes even union members, but there is a key difference between middle-class professionals and their fellow wage earners in the working class. The difference is that the professional or manager is granted far more autonomy in his or her work and is expected to be fairly self-directing much of the time. In fact, his or her job is often to define the work of others, to conceptualize, and command. The second marker is defining experiences, and she writes about how this group has a guild-like quality, and that they are open for the most part only to people who have completed a lengthy education and attained certain credentials, the period of study and apprenticeship, which may extend nearly to midlife, is essential to the social cohesion of the middle class. It is in college or graduate school that the young often find their future spouses and lifelong friends. Much more than extended childhood, however, this long training period requires the discipline and self-direction that are essential to the adult occupational life of the class. Again, she's talking about them being self-directed and then directing others as a crucial marker of this class. Next, she writes about income, saying, for the most part, members of the PMC earn upper middle incomes, though they may range from a non-Ivy League professor's $30,000 to six-figure salaries for a star professor or big city attorney. Typically, middle-class couples earn enough for home ownership in a neighborhood inhabited by other members of their class, college education for their children, and such enriching experiences as vacation trips, psychotherapy, fitness training, summer camps, and the consumption of quote-unquote culture in various forms. And the fourth marker is lifestyle and tastes. All of the above, she writes, shape a rough commonality of lifestyle and consumer tastes. In general, the middle class uses consumption to establish its status, especially relative to the working class. Typically, this has meant an emphasis on things quote-unquote authentic, quote-unquote natural, and frequently imported. And a particular bête noire for Ehrenreich within the PMC is its left wing, because the right wing has always been reactionary, in favor of corporate and racial hierarchies, etc., nothing new there. But what was new and coming to fruition as the hippies of the 60s and 70s transformed into the yuppies of the 80s and the 90s was the synthesis between American consumerism and professionalism and bureaucratization with the new left's ethos of individual, sexual, and consumer liberation. She writes that in the intersection of the left and the counterculture, a new kind of political ideology emerged. It was definitely of the left in its hatred of corporate power and the military-industrial complex, but too wary of government to be socialist. It was altruistic in its commitment to the downtrodden, but too invested in a vision of personal liberation to be dour and self-sacrificing. Soon after, she writes, "It was, of course, utopian, contemptuous of mere reform, and committed to a startling, total transformation that would bring human social arrangements into line with human needs and desires." And this beef with the New Left is echoed in one of Ehrenreich's followers, Catherine Liu, who a year or two ago released Virtue Hoarders, The Case Against the Professional Managerial Class. And she picks up the same note, saying, Frederick Jameson and other Marxists identified a quote-unquote cultural turn in our understanding of social antagonism, eclipsing economic conditions for apparatuses of divining tastes and affects. In the evolution of the PMC, antagonism against mainstream culture and ordinary people were mixed up with its smug sense of subcultural superiority. So for now, let's switch over to discussing James Burnham and his take on the PMC. He started out as an old left stalwart, specifically a Trotskyist, and eventually grew disillusioned with it, so much so that he became the intellectual, or one of the intellectual founders of American neoconservatism and paleoconservatism. In 1941, he wrote The Managerial Revolution, where he prophesied a shift in how capitalism functions. And in a way, he was saying, kind of like Mackenzie Wark, which Laurie talked about years ago, that capital is dead. The capitalist has been eclipsed by the manager, was his claim. In a foreword George Orwell wrote to the book, Orwell says that capitalism is disappearing, but socialism is not replacing it. What is now arising is a new kind of planned, centralized society, which will be neither capitalist nor, in any accepted sense of the word, democratic. The rulers of this new society will be the people who effectively control the means of production, that is, business executives, technicians, bureaucrats, and soldiers, lumped together by Burnham under the name of managers. These people will eliminate the old capitalist class, crush the working class, and so organize society that all power and economic privilege remain in their own hands. Private property rights will be abolished, but common ownership will not be established. And in this, he is providing a mutation on a crucial Marxist concept, which is called subsumption, which, according to the Marxist.org encyclopedia, is defined as the process by which the social relations of production penetrate the labor process itself. And historically, Marx used it to describe how capital and capitalism got a foothold within feudalism that allowed it to penetrate back into feudalism, change the nature of feudal society, and create a kind of proto-capitalism. It's a really complicated idea. I'm not doing a great job of explaining it. I would encourage you, if you're interested, especially if you have any leftist commitments, to research and really consider the implications of such an idea. Burnham went on to write other books like The Machiavellians, which he characterizes the PMC as sort of cynical, pragmatic people who can actually change society and potentially, if they could get their heads right, for the better. As well as The Suicide of the West, which is a take on the classic conservative issue of how do we deal with societal decay and senescence. And what's remarkable about Burnham is by the mid-40s, he'd already sketched out what would eventually come to be called American neoconservatism and paleoconservatism, and specifically neoconservatism's synthesis of economic liberalism, quote-unquote traditional values, and militant anti-communism. But setting aside his conservatism, what he shares in common with Ehrenreich and Liu and the other thinker we'll be getting to shortly is how he views the managerial class subsuming the capitalist class, sort of taking over the machinery of social production and bending it to their ends. And this concern about the bureaucratization, but not the democratization, of the means of production, I would argue, is still ubiquitous today. Theorists on the left tend to call it neo-feudalism or techno-feudalism, and prophesy a kind of Hunger Games future where corporations will be pampering the privileged and the outcasts and the rebels will be exiled to the wilderness. And on the right, it can express itself in sort of John Bircher-esque, QAnon-esque concerns about cultural Marxism and the Great Reset being a sort of global corporatist takeover of everything in which freedom and the individual is extinguished under the crushing might of the technocracy and the elites. Now, another thinker I want to briefly bring in is named Matt Christman. He's one of the hosts on Chapo Trap House. He's the second there from the left. And he argues a good way to look at American politics as it currently stands is as an internecine fight between the right liberals within the PMC that he calls the boaters and the left liberals in the PMC, which he refers to as the brunchers. So he argues that the left wing of the PMC, the Democrats, can be termed brunchers. There's a famous sign from the Women's March at the beginning of 2017 saying if Hillary was president, we'd all be out at brunch, implying that everything's basically fine. We don't need to worry about healthcare. We don't need to worry about student loans. We don't need to worry about American imperialism. We don't need to worry about economic development or redevelopment. We just really don't like and feel threatened by the Orange Cheeto in the White House and his redneck, misogynist, fascist supporters. And conversely, there's the beautiful boaters who have enough money to buy a boat and put all sorts of gauche decals on it, and who will mob up and show their support for Trump as if that is a bold political statement or organizing move or what have you. But I'll tell you what they're not doing. They're not having savory crepes and mimosas with their diverse collection of colleagues. Instead, they're way more likely to be running small businesses or extracting natural resources or producing material goods. Or they're part of a bureaucracy that requires dealing with the hard sciences and gritty material realities. So from the perspective of a brunch Democrat PMC, they can look at someone like Native and Caitlin B. Curtis and like, yeah, right on. We should celebrate minority identities. We should scream about how America is founded on white supremacy. We should vote for people like Elizabeth Warren or at least Joe Biden because then everything will be fine. Because from our perspective, we do self-directed work from climate-controlled offices, and we make pretty decent wages. So life can't be too bad, right? And to the extent it's not fine, it's because of those damn unbeautiful boaters holding us back. And from the port side perspective, you can look at people like Caitlin B. Curtis in her book and be like, she's a cultural Marxist. She's part of an international conspiracy to destroy the individual and freedom. And everything would be fine if we could get back to the first things that are the Constitution and the Bible, and we cut yet more government regulations that are hampering free enterprise. And it's this mutually constituting and reaffirming and reflecting nature of this rift within the PMC that Catherine Liu talks about when she writes that, quote, as a class, the PMC loves to talk about bias rather than inequality, racism rather than capitalism, visibility rather than exploitation. Tolerance for them is the highest secular virtue, but tolerance has almost no political or economic meaning. The right is well aware of liberal preening, and it has weaponized popular resentment against this class of alleged hypocrites. Fox News lives to own liberals. Reactionary hatred of professionals and professionalism come not out of love for the people, but out of fealty to the special sovereignty of free markets to solve all social problems. In fact, conservatives need a functioning and powerful PMC cadre of inhibited professionals to serve as punching bags for their politics of popular resentment. The PMC continues to oblige these reactionaries by betraying popular policies like Medicare for All, opting instead for means-tested, think-tank-brewed big pharma and lobbyist-approved forms of healthcare that allow for profit-taking to take place at the expense of public health. In summation, what all of these thinkers, from Aaron Reich to Burnham to Matt Christman, share in common is a suspicion of how earnest any PMC group is, whether they're brunchers or boaters, to actually care about their fellow, not even human beings, even countrymen, country people. So I'll let you marinate on that for a week until we pick up this discussion again. There's a couple more announcements to make in the interim. We're trying out our first ever advertisement. We don't like to do it. We feel that it jeopardizes our independence here at Political Philosophy HQ. But as dangerously downwardly mobile members of the PMC ourselves, Dr. Johnson and I have to keep the lights on somehow. And as Mark says in the 1848 manuscripts, we all become the general prostitutes of society. So what can you do? Thank you very much to Simon and Schuster for paying us. And as well, I've included an appendix after this ad from Matt Christman with his spicy take, extrapolating on what's been discussed here. He's not necessarily saying anything that I haven't already said. He's just saying it in his characteristically Christman way, and I think it's worth it. Also, he uses some pretty salty language, so if you have delicate ears or a soul, be advised. Anyway, have a great week, and I'll see you next time. This episode of Political Philosophy has been brought to you by Rage Baking, the transformative power of flour, fury, and women's voices. Published by Simon and Schuster. The back of it says, punching bread dough, rolling out pie crusts, balancing sweetness and acidity. Baking is such a great outlet for expressing our feelings about the current state of our country. Rage Baking offers more than 50 cookie, cake, tart, bread, and pudding recipes, as well as inspirational essays, reflections, poems, and interviews with well-known bakers and impassioned women and activists. Bake down the patriarchy with recipes like impeachment upside down cake, not taking any more sheet cake, don't call me honey cakes, a Maine blueberry Supreme Court crumble, and pigs in a blanket. This timely cookbook speaks to both advanced and beginner bakers who are looking for new ways to use their sweetest skills to combine food and activism.
At the end of the day, I honestly think this, and Jeremy Corbyn is why I believe this, is that people don't think that they can change anything with politics. Anything structural. If it's structural, it is by definition not political. That is what we believe, because that's what we believe. And why do we believe it? Because it's what we live. It is just our lived experience, ironically enough. Our collective lived experience is capitalist realism. It is that because we stopped having a class adversarial relationship at the top level of government in the 70s, and that the democratic project has basically been dead since then, and that as a result of that, the two parties don't argue about things like how long should people work, what should be the conditions of their work, what should be remuneration, what should be the standard of living for an American. Those questions are not political to people, even if we talk about them sometimes high-mindedly. And what that means is that at this point, I feel like if you get in front of a bunch of people, casuals, who are going to just come into the polls because it's so easy now, they're going to hear you say, I want to get Medicare for all, and I want to make everybody have free college, just like Corbyn did, because Corbyn got to run a general election where he got to make his message spread in a country where they have a fucking parliamentary system where if he got in power, he could actually have done some stuff. Because they don't have our stupid fucking constitution. It's a majority rule, and yet, in the red redoubt there, the red wall, they went they went for Brexit because Brexit was more real to them than the stuff Corbyn was promising, because they didn't think he was telling them the truth. And even though some people are going to be disarmed by the genuineness of a guy like Corbyn and Bernie, and that's going to get you some people, it's not going to get you enough people. And a lot of people are going to see it, and they're going to be like, yeah. And then they're going to go back to the big questions, which are cultural and identity-based. And I think one of the big reasons that there's a disconnect here, and that like the political class, and by that I mean literally people who pay attention to politics at all, and give investment into their vote, they believe that when they think of a political party, they think of it as a historical entity, and they think of it as having a history of things that it's done, and as having a coherent platform that involves things like distribution of resources. But the thing is, that's only if you've learned that shit and keep it in your head when you think about the Democratic Party. For these casual voters who will come in, if there's a breeze, they will be blown into the voting booth. They only see the party in front of them. And the Democratic Party is the party that just says, don't be an asshole, in a wheedling voice. Like, come on, guys. Do we have to be so mean? Because, as Trump says, Trump's big rejoinder to the kids in cages is, who's built the cages? And the thing is, we're going to have cages. And the question becomes, culturally, are we going to be an asshole about having the cages, or are we going to be a fucking pussy about having the cages? And that's the difference. Liberals say, we got to have cages, but don't be an asshole about cages. Liberals, Republicans say, look, we got to have cages, don't be a fucking pussy about cages. That's it. Those are the two parties, as people understand them, as cultural signals. Like those things in the older generations, the people that make up the leadership of these political parties and are largely like disproportionately heard in its culture, such that it's political culture, it's self-conscious political culture. They all remember a time, lived in their lives, when there was some sort of ideological coherence and meaning to the Democratic Party that involved material relationship. But people living now, certainly ones who just decided to vote in 2020, do not have that. They see the don't be an asshole party, the don't be a pussy party, and whether you want to be an asshole or a pussy in America comes down to, did you go to, someone say it. Someone say it. College. Thank you. That's it. Boop. Educational attainment. Did you go to the etiquette school? A thing that used to get you entry into a real middle class, right? Because you get a professional degree and it would give you an access to a professional lifestyle. Those are gone, but the attendant social prestige is still there. And so people still go to college and consider themselves part of this thing, even though it doesn't get them anything but the same gig economy job everybody else has. But it changes the way they vote. But not on a material basis, because that's not part of our politics. And then you have the people who, and in college you learn, you know, hey, we're moving papers around in here. We're muffling all the horrible shit that our system creates, all the blood that we create. When we create a bunch of bullshit language that we talk to each other nicely, good phrases, and we raise our pinkies up. We learned this from the British when we talk about how many fucking slave barges we've just moved through the port of fucking Equatorial Guinea. We have acculturated ourselves to the brutality of extraction, of being at the top of a pyramid of human misery. And so we've learned how to kind of let off the steam of the anxiety of living that every day, the horror of it, in the form of liberal politesse. Like, it used to be manners, it used to be religion, then it became manners after God died. And that manners used to be, you know, in the old reactionary era, pinky extended, stiff upper lip shit. Manners now need post-60s, mommy, we all love each other, hug box, snowflake stuff, if you want to call it. And so you go through that fire and you get the message, don't be a fucking asshole. Now, the thing is, a lot of guys are going to hear, even going through that system, just because you think, I'm actually going to make money out of this. Like the ones who go into college thinking, hey, I'm going to really get a career out of it, the suckers, in other words, they're going to come out reactionary. Because fuck this, you know what, I want to be an asshole. Because the don't be an asshole thing, it's so awfully condescending and sadistic and contentless. It has no meaning related to anyone's actual lives. It says, keep your voice down. We're trying to study. And what if you don't fucking want to study? What if you don't fucking want to study, bitch? What am I studying for? You used to be able to say, I'm studying to get a job, but now that's not it. I'm studying so I can sit around with another bunch of people and pretend that I'm part of a fucking cognitive elite? Are you fucking kidding me? But one of the things about that was once you're out of that, there's the fucking sunk cost. And it's like, shit, I'm not going back. I'm not going to be like my dad. No, I'm a good leftist. I'm a lib. And it's going to affect you regardless of what your gender demo is or race or whatever. But if you didn't have that experience, if those manners and the anxiety, the social anxiety related to being aware of things like privilege didn't like seep into you and like become constitutive of your ability to enjoy yourself, which you can only get in those experiences of collegiate brainwashing, then what do you know? You don't fucking give a shit. And that means when someone tells you to keep your voice down and tells you to don't be an asshole, you're not thinking, you know what, you're right. You're thinking, you're lying. You're just saying that to get me to be quiet because you're a fucking selfish asshole like we all are, and you're saying some bullshit about, oh, we're gonna all get good grades on the thing. It's disingenuous. It's a lie. Oh, the cage babies. You built the cages. And it's true. Because the conditions of American politics assume that there will be climate catastrophe, there will be pandemic that will never be stopped, there will be continued economic bottoming out, there will be people killing themselves in greater and greater number, indirectly, there will be just social collapse. And the replacement with just the mere attenuated nerve endings of pure stimulus response. The people who can bury themselves in the internet to find some reason to keep moving forward. Imagine frontier they can walk through into the digital realm while everybody else just dissolves. And we are seeing this with the vote. Race is being, we're seeing the poll. Now, the biggest weight, the most dramatic one you can see it is Latinos. And of course people say, those Latino men, it's the machismo. It's like, well, that's kind of true in a vague sense, in the sense that the Don't Be an Asshole party is feminine, culturally marked, and the Don't Be a Pussy party is masculine. And so if that's just down to boys versus girls, if politics is just boys versus girls, and you think you're a guy, well, why wouldn't you pick guys? Unless you wanted the girls to like you. And you only learn that when you're sitting around with the other kids at the fucking tea party in college. So if it's the dudes rock party and the hens party or whatever, I don't know. A woman should name the equivalent of the dudes rock party, because obviously this is not dudes rock. It's awful. It's toxic masculinity. It is. It's awful. It's bad. Its political expression is noxious and awful. The policies it proposes are terrible, but they're the same policies and the same outcomes that the Democrats do. They're just coded differently.